So, you like The Legend of Zelda? Of course you do. This is one of the most important game series ever. You can pick up any Zelda game and you'll find so many memorable characters, locations, music, items, bosses. When all the pieces come together, there is nothing quite like playing The Legend of Zelda. But you're not surprised to hear this, right? You already know it. You know Ocarina of Time is still debated to be the greatest game of all time. You know that Majora's Mask is a beautiful, nightmarish anomaly of a game. You know how beloved Wind Waker's art style is, how melancholic and heartfelt Twilight Princess is, Skyward Sword, and you know how much of an event it was when we finally got our hands on Breath of the Wild. And this is just talking about the 3D Zeldas. Link's Awakening is such a fantastic and quirky little adventure in the Game Boy. A Link to the Past had a world at a scale like no other. Minish Cap with its charming style and characters. We love these games. We love Tetra, we love Midna, we love Ganondorf, Malon, Cafe and Anju, Sheik, the Skull Kid. So many memorable characters with their own stories and arcs to follow. Helping them out in the main game or side quests gives you an insight into the people who inhabit this world and their lives. If there is one thing people love about Zelda, it's definitely the characters. But what about Link? Sure, we all like Link. I don't know anybody who dislikes him. You'll often see fan art, comics, and videos about him, showcasing funny interactions with other characters, maybe just lusting after him. Videos talking about his many incarnations and which one is the strongest. But unlike many other characters, bosses, or even locations in the series, you'll rarely see anybody analyzing Link's character. And why is that? Well, because there is no character. Of course, there isn't just one Link. Pretty much every Zelda game protagonist is a new Link living his own adventure. They have their own world, setting, and princess to save. But at the end of the day, there really isn't much difference between these. When The Legend of Zelda first started, Link was nothing more than the connection between the game and the player. I'm only the 37th person to tell you that this week. But interestingly, Link wasn't technically his name. It was the default, it's what merchandise, the manual, and the cartoons call him. But you could always give the protagonist a different name. So it wasn't Link who saved the world, it was you. And this worked out pretty well. After all, they were severely limited in how much expression a character that looks like this can have. If anything, giving him a personality might just get in the way. And this applies to A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, the Oracle games. Sure, they had much more story to them, but in simpler times like these, it was still widely acceptable to have a silent protagonist that mostly just served as a player stand-in, or even just a mascot. Yeah, Mega Man doesn't have a lot to say, but knowing that Dr. Wily is up to no good is enough for the player to understand what's going on. But then we get to the Nintendo 64 era, and things start to get bigger. Welcome to 3D now. Cutscenes went from looking like this to this. Not only were characters more detailed and, three-dimensional, but the camera could get right in their faces. They could emote. Scenes could be dynamic. The possibilities for character acting and interaction suddenly became endless, even when character faces looked like that. And Ocarina of Time wasted no time in putting all of these to good use. NPCs emote to show how they feel, characters pose dramatically during cutscenes, dynamic camera angles were used, and this was the first time Link showed any emotion. Sure, he's still mute, which is a bit jarring, in which how much more dialogue there is and how many cutscenes the game has, not to mention the overall bigger emphasis on the story. But this game had no voice acting anyway, so having a silent protagonist still feels somewhat natural. And hey, he has some emotions here and there. I like the part where he sits down to listen to the story that Deku Tree tells him. He has a voice, well, not lines, but he does this iconic... My biggest issue with him here is how lacking he is in the facial expression department, which is very noticeable. I mean, look at the scene where little Zelda is talking about Ganondorf, looking clearly concerned and showing plenty of emotion. Meanwhile, Link just stares. This might be due in part to this game actually being developed as a first-person adventure for a while. This is mere speculation, but maybe that's why the other characters seem to have more facial expressions than the guy who you're looking at for 99% of the time. And even then, I can understand Link being pretty much the same as his 2D counterparts, because after all, this is the first 3D Zelda game. They were breaking so many series conventions and creating many groundbreaking game mechanics, so having a bland protagonist is hardly something to get up in arms about. Then we go to Majora's Mask, again on the Nintendo 64, and while this is the exact same Link we played as in Ocarina of Time, and actually not very long after the game ended, there are some significant improvements to his characterization here. This is one of the two Zelda games to have a story that was directly kickstarted by Link. Yes, he got to Termina by chasing that school kid, but he was only in that situation because he chose to explore the Lost Woods in chase of Navi. This is way more of a personal story to him. Majora's Mask is all about connecting with different people and building bonds to achieve happiness, so having a more emotionally available hero was a necessity. It's nothing mind-blowing and he continues to be mute, but there are clear signs of emotion and thought here. He is visually very distressed when transformed into a Deku. He runs away in fear during hallucinations. When Tattle asks him for help, he's clearly not thrilled about it, but resigns himself to help her anyway. He's very awkward when the mask salesman asks for the Majora's Mask back. Don't get me wrong, he's overall pretty identical to his character in Ocarina, but there's differences like these that really do help connect with the little guy. Later for Wind Waker, we got what to this day is the most expressive incarnation of Link, at least externally. Now in way more advanced hardware with shinier graphics, the storytelling potential just keeps rising, and here's where my problems start. It made sense for the N64 Zelda games to lack voice acting, because these things could only hold like one picture of your mom if you were lucky. But when we get to the bigger scale of a GameCube disc file size, audio files for voice acting are a drop in the bucket compared to all the assets in the game, so it's not a storage issue. This is the first time we're lacking any voice acting was most likely a creative decision. And I can't deny there's certainly a charm to it. But at the same time, by this point having voice acting in your game wasn't really a cool novelty or a badge of honor anymore. It was just the standard. If anything, not having it kinda made your game feel cheap. And I don't think we need to argue that Nintendo had the money for it. But at the same time, it does come with the added benefit of mute Link not being as jarring. And actually he does technically speak. He says, and even at that, they completely address the issue of Link looking wooden during cutscenes. He emotes a lot. If you know one thing about this Link, is how expressive he is, which does a lot of heavy lifting to help endear us to the character. But even then, having him be a mute is really starting to be less excusable. Sure, we can infer how he feels about certain things. He cares about his sister, he's determined in a fight, he reacts funny when silly things happen. But still, there's only so much you can do with this approach. I think the best way to put it is just to compare him to the other Triforce wielders and how they're characterized here. Since this is a story that happens explicitly as a consequence of the events of Ocarina of Time, even sharing the same exact villain, this is a lot of people's favorite incarnation of Ganondorf for a reason. Because we get to see him reflect on his past actions, expressing some regret that things have to end this way, even showing mercy to his biggest enemies, showing a level of maturity and patience that this guy never had. A couple hundred years under the sea will do that to you. This game Zelda is a fan favorite too. Starting out as a snarky pirate captain that helps you out on your adventure, she might just be more capable than Link. And when confronted with her true identity as Princess Zelda, she's actually not sure how to go about it, even voluntarily choosing to step aside to keep the Triforce of Wisdom safe, something that, based off her previous action, we'd never expect of her. Maybe it's the loss of the Melanin. I do have some issues with how her character is treated here, and while that's maybe a story for another day, it still serves my point. 2 of the 3 Triforce wielders have moments where they express or show how they feel about carrying this mantle. Even your boat in this game has a surprising amount of depth. Meanwhile, Link? Well, we just don't know. How does he feel about suddenly being given the mantle of hero? I don't know. How does he feel about Tetra aside from basic hero stuff? That's a very good question. Yes, this Link is very expressive and charming and all, but still, his reactions to everything that happens around him are very basic. He is shocked when you expect him to be, determined when needed, happy when fitting, so on. There's no surprises here, no character-defining moments, nothing that really makes him stand out. This will be a recurring theme, but I want you to have this question in your mind for the rest of the video. If we switched around any of these links to a different game, would the stories be any different? Twilight Princess comes next, and it pains me to say it, but this is the breaking point. All of my statements about voice acting still apply here, but this Link is so... nothing? He's kind of the same as Wind Waker Link, coming from a small town and eventually having to rise up and be a hero to protect the people he cares about. But again, silent protagonist, and he doesn't even have the courtesy of being expressive this time. He's kind of just stoic hero, except when he's a wolf and he's just kind of grumpy all the time. Doesn't help that he has the best companion in the series. Midna is so fun and useful and unique and has a very interesting story to her. I need you to remember, I adore this game. I love this story and this world to pieces. But when asked why, I don't think I can name Link as one of the reasons. Yeah, he emotes correctly according to the situation, But it's the same as Wind Waker. He never does or expresses anything that would affect the story. He never pushes back on any other character. When someone tells him to do something, he never questions why. He just accepts everything anything says to him, because that's his job as video game protagonist. Skyward Sword is a bit better. Link is more outwardly expressive here, and there's even dialogue choices in some cutscenes where you can make fun of Gris's hair or be snarky towards Impa. He also gets some, well, really just one moment to show some emotional range. I like the scene right here where he tries to prevent Zelda from going into slumber, and we see some desperation in him. This might be the Link that has the most bonding with the larger cast of characters. There's a reason as to why a lot of people love this incarnation of Zelda. She's by far the most dynamic character she's ever been. Sorry, Tetra, but you lost it when you put on the dress. She has playful banter with Link that showcases their lifelong friendship, and she has her own journey to accepting her role as the reincarnation of Hylia. Meanwhile, Link is pretty much the same through the whole game. It's not all bad. Like I said, he shows more emotion than his Wolf Boy counterpart. And this is the first Link where I would argue that his relationships with other characters are full on display and not just alluded to. But overall, there's not much in the way of pushing his character forward. Something something, unlike any other open world, something something, non-linear story, yada yada. I'm grouping Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom together here because there's basically no difference in how Link behaves in each game. Look, there's only so many ways I can complain about the same thing. Yes, Link is mute, but remember how I said before that the lack of voice acting made it less jarring? Well, we got voice acting now. The cutscenes in the Wild Era games are in a different league, and there is way more focus on character now. We even get to see the struggles of Princess Zelda, and the screen presence of the champions and their descendants is very welcome, which makes it even worse of a case for Link. Again, he has his moments of emotions here and there. Interestingly enough, this is also the very first time his name is fixed in place as Link, which is definitely due to voice acting in this game, making it difficult to account for a chosen name. We get a bit of a backstory for Link in these games, how he was born into a family of knights and always had a lot of expectations put on him thanks to the potential he showed as a kid. And we get to know how Mipha met a young Link and over time fell in love with him. We get Zelda's perspective on him as her assigned escort. Interestingly enough, there's some meta-awareness here where Link's lack of speech is something directly addressed, and that Zelda expresses to be unnerving for her because she can't understand what he thinks. And in the pages of her diary, she writes about getting to know him more, noticing how he has a weakness for food, and there's a very interesting entry in her diary where she retells an actual conversation she had with him, where he explains that the reason he doesn't speak much is because of the overwhelming expectations placed on him as the chosen hero in the Prince's Guard. This is a very cool interpretation of these characters. Zelda and Link have always been people with very important roles forced upon them, with no choice other than to step forward and be the ones to put a stop to the constant danger that Hyrule faces. Getting a glimpse on how they actually feel about their assigned roles was overdue. Unfortunately, this is not the story the game is interested in telling, and all the details about it are hidden away in the ruins of Zelda's lab, in her old diary. I'd talk about Tears of the Kingdom, but this game's story is basically a rehash of Breath of the Wild in a lot of places. Only thing noteworthy is that presumably Link and Zelda have been living together. Fun fact, this is actually the oldest playable Link ever, being around 21 years old during the game, or 121 if you count the Century Nap. But Tears of the Kingdom doesn't do itself any favors either by refusing to acknowledge the events of Breath of the Wild unless absolutely necessary. It's been 3 years that Link and Zelda have spent together going around trying to rebuild Hyrule, only for all their efforts to be threatened by the sudden penis. I think I'm living that in. Only for all their efforts to be threatened by the sudden appearance of Ganondorf. Not only did Link fail to protect Zelda again, but he even lost his trusted weapon and the world around him is falling apart. Literally. How does he feel about this? That's a very good question. Series producer Eiji Aonuma would be directly asked about Breath of the Wild Link's character and motivations. This is what he had to say about it.
So the Link from Breath of the Wild doesn't have that much of a character, and that was done intentionally. We wanted the players to be able to relate to Link and play as themselves. You can probably see that there's not much expression on Link's face. I want you to play through the game and you'll understand why I intended to do this.
This is not new information. We all know that Link is just a vessel for the player. That's what he was created to be, and that's all he's ever allowed to be. However, I just can't agree that this is a good use for him anymore. After so many decades in games that keep pushing the technology and stories forward, this limited vision for Link comes across as nothing more than a limitation in the name of preserving a series tradition. And why is it a limitation, you may ask? Because having an intentionally empty protagonist has so many ramifications on the types of story you can tell. For example, he doesn't have any character dynamics. He'll just nod and go on his merry way after any interaction. Isn't it disappointing that the most personal connection Link can have to Ganondorf as his main arch-nemesis is, "I will defeat you because otherwise you'll take over the world"? Him being unable to express anything means he has no beliefs to protect, no flawed worldview to unlearn, no philosophic differences with any of his antagonists, and this ripples through every aspect of the story. That's why Zelda antagonists all gotta have the same "I will take over the world and make it evil" plan, because anything more complex would require pushback from the main hero, something that he's unfortunately incapable of doing. This may depend on how present you were in social media in 2019, but back when they showed the first teaser for Tears of the Kingdom, at the time simply referred to as the sequel to Breath of the Wild, we all saw that Ganondorf mummy. There was a plethora of theories as to what this may entail. Is this the same Ganondorf from Twilight Princess? Are we going to get more information that connects the earlier games to the Wild era? Wait, so Calamity Ganon was just the malice leaking out of the true source, which is Ganondorf? And amongst many other questions and speculation, there was one very prevalent theory about the direction this game might take, which is ending the cycle. The eternal battle between Demise, the goddess, and the hero. Maybe this coming back of Ganondorf means that we will get to see a villain get defeated in a new way. But that was never going to happen. Because we don't have a hero capable of empathizing or understanding its main antagonist. Because thanks to his role as a player self-insert, Link can't make any choices. He cannot have too much personal investment. He can't alter the story in any significant way. So the only role he can have is to wield the Master Sword and stab Ganondorf to death. I'm not saying that the redemption path is what they should have done. What I'm saying is that the underwhelming use of Ganondorf and all of the story of Tears of the Kingdom can be connected to how hollow Link is as a character. But hey, you might be thinking, you have done nothing but complain so far. Are you actually going to propose a solution, or do you just want to whine? And that's a fair point. I believe that the reason as to why many people don't have a problem with the lack of character Link has is simply because, well, that's just the way things are. This is how Link is, and he's never been anything else, so it's not like we have a direct point of comparison. Or do we? Nintendo has always dabbled in making their properties multimedia. It wasn't uncommon for their games in the 80s and 90s to get a little something extra. To give you a bit more context of the world and characters, Super Metroid came with a little comic book, but is far from canon now. The Super Mario Bros. Super Show was a thing, and in their Fridays airing, the usual Mario cartoon would be Zelda. This is an interesting showcase of the separation at the time from Nintendo of America and Japan. Back then, Nintendo wasn't too worried about silly things like character consistency, so Link could say the line,
"Excuse me, princess."
But over time, they started being more cautious about how the characters would be adapted. Like the Metroid Zero Mission manga, which was meant to be a canonical backstory for Samus, F-Zero got an anime, and we all know about Pokemon, and yes, Kirby Right Back At Ya was a thing. But back in 1999, or the year 2000, sources vary, we were introduced to a little someone who would start giving us Zelda fans some of the most interesting takes on this elf boy, and his name is Akira Himekawa. This man is actually not a man. In fact, he's a woman. Two of them. Ai Honda and S. Nagano. And starting with Ocarina of Time, they've made manga adaptations of a bunch of other Zelda games. And I find these really neat. I'm not really going into detail with these because that's a subject for another day, but overall these are pretty neat. They translate the fantasy world of Hyrule and others to the page really well. The art is vibrant and easy to follow, but these being adaptations of pre-existing stories meant that Akira, which is how I'll be referring to both of them for simplicity, had to take stories that were first and foremost written to justify gameplay and expand on them to actually make them stand on their own, which included expanding on Link, making him an actual character. Most of their works are pretty short, you can finish them in an afternoon, and I see them more as neat collectibles or alternate takes than stories that could really stand on their own. And that's fine, after all, they're companion pieces for the hardcore fans who want a bit more of the stories they already love. But back in 2016, the manga adaptation for Twilight Princess started releasing. Not as shorter 2-volume stories like Ocarina of Time, but as a full serialized story, starting in 2016 and ending in 2022. They were in this for the long run, and the result is what I personally believe is not only the best incarnation of Link within official releases, but also just might be the greatest story that this series has ever told. But how's the Link here? It's not even a fair comparison. It's night and day. We go from a stoic hero type protagonist with no real personal struggles to... This is Link. But who is he? He's a refugee from a faraway land that was destroyed by a mysterious calamity. The people of Ordon took him in, gave him a home, a job, and a community to belong to, and Link gets along with the villagers really well. The kids especially seem to admire him the most. But there's something odd about him. He's very reserved about his past. He has an interest in dark magic, or at least collecting books on it since he claims he's not able to read them. During the opening section of the story, there are many tidbits of information that allude to Link's backstory, and when we finally learn where he comes from and why he seems to know about the dangers of the darkness and is so cautious about it, not only is it satisfying narratively, but it also fits beautifully within the lore of the games. It expands on the purpose of a lot of the locations in the game and feeds into his own motivation, and this helps a lot in the development of the story, since Link here is an active participant and not just does whatever anybody tells him. He has a personal investment in the people he wants to save, not just because they're the people he lives with, but because he lost his friends before and he feels responsible for it, and he'll do anything in his power to prevent that from ever happening again. His relationship to other characters is greatly expanded. We see that Ilya was the first person to welcome him to the village. We see him express his desire to become a part of the community, which feeds into his kind and helping demeanor. He's very hesitant to pick up a sword again since he remembers what happens the last time he did that, but will throw himself face first into danger to protect the people he cares about. We get to see his reaction to being turned into a wolf and the desperation and despair that comes with it. The first thing he mentions is if his friends will even recognize him. His encounter with Midna is much more hostile here, and she's very openly treating him as a pawn. This eventually develops into a genuinely heartfelt connection as they open up and rely on each other, not only for battling but also emotionally. Link needs Midna as much as she needs him. There's a fantastic arc in which after many successful encounters, Link is a bit full of himself, and Midna confronts him about it, calling him a fool and telling him that his pride will be the end of him. Link doesn't listen. He fully believes himself to be invincible thanks to his status as the chosen hero. So Midna leaves, and Link is left alone. Thinking that she just doesn't understand him, Link goes and confronts an entire Bokoblin battalion on his own, overconfident in his own abilities and the power of the Master Sword. And he loses. Badly. The Master Sword stops obeying him. He's left on the brink of death and is only bailed out thanks to the intervention of the Golden Wolf. After this, Link is at his lowest point, physically and mentally. He feels unworthy of his role as the hero, and he can't even wield the Master Sword anymore. He's forced to confront what it means to be a hero and accept that responsibility fully. Even the past Link, in the form of the hero's shade, makes an appearance in this chapter. You actually feel the absence of Midna and how Link feels lost without her. And when she finally appears, the two of them share a genuine, tender moment where they embrace each other and actually show that they care about each other. The rest of the story follows similarly, expanding on basically every character in it. Even this guy gets some development, and I really could go into more detail because I love this manga to pieces, but I think I'll leave it here. Because I want you to go read it, and if you did, tell me what you think about it. This manga is so good, it kind of makes me angry. Because it showed me exactly what the series' protagonist was missing. Not just dialogue, but personal investment, developed relationships with the supporting cast, emotional range, pushing back against other characters, moments of weakness, self-doubt, struggle. This take on the character is so nuanced, and is it really impossible to have something like this in the mainline games? I understand that it being a manga means it can focus 100% of the story without having to justify gameplay, but come on, having developed main characters is far from a novel concept. I think it's time for Link to drop his emotionless, mute personality, because having seen the potential stories we could have with a more dynamic Link, the traditional approach just doesn't cut it anymore. On an interview with Games Master, series producer Aonuma would be asked about Link speaking, and he would say,
"We had a lot of requests from fans to hear Link's voice, and while in some ways I feel like it could be good to have a game where he speaks, part of me also feels that that air of proud independence he has because he doesn't speak is a precious part of the individuality of his character. I want to think long and hard about whether changing that would be for the better or not before I make any decision."
This is not very surprising because, for better or worse, Nintendo developers have a very practical view on making any changes. If it's not going to be something that reflects directly on gameplay, chances are they're not including it. Why was Princess Zelda never playable? Well, why should she? If it's a regular Zelda game and she'll play the same as Link, then why bother? which explains why Echoes of Wisdom experimented with a different gameplay style. This approach definitely has advantages. It prevents arbitrary changes from happening, but it can also lead to stagnation. Link being this way is considered part of his core identity, since he was conceived as a connection between the player and the game. But this is one aspect of the series that I strongly feel like Nintendo should reconsider. After all, they've evolved the series in unexpected ways many times, but the one thing they've refused to evolve and the single aspect of their games that holds their storytelling back just so happens to be the main character. And so it's done! I did it! I made another video! God, it's been long, hasn't it? This video was hard to make. It started being, like, more so talking about Nintendo stories overall, but then I realized I was mostly talking about Zelda, and then I realized I was mostly talking about Link. So I had to write the script, like, I don't know, 4 times? Yeah, damn. But I sure did it. I did it, and it's done, and you guys can watch it, and you guys can either agree with me, or you can tell me to kill myself. Huh.